Are you ready to break free from the automatic fawn response? Break free from that habit of always people pleasing and subjugating your own needs? It is possible, and today we're going to talk about how. So, I'm going to go through 9 components that are required for healing. And the first three are going to be about internal work. The next 3 are going to be a little bit more practical in the world things you can do, and then the last 3 are the deeper work. So just to try to help you stay organized with this. So with the first 3, number 1 is to recognize that fawning developed because it was necessary at the time. So it was a survival strategy, and it might have been the very best choice. It may also have been, in many ways, the only choice. So the fawn response is a behavior developed in childhood, often connected to complex trauma. It could even be little t traumas on an ongoing basis, where as a child, you learn to subjugate yourself to the caregiver in order to stay in relationship and survive. So this becomes a very deeply ingrained survival behavior, which can become habitual. And then as you grow up, it gets applied to all situations. And even today, as adults, there are situations where choosing a fawning type behavior might actually be the best choice. That's a little bit of an aside, but I just want to put this into the framework that sometimes in some situations, fawning might make sense. We want to get to the point where it's not an automatic go to. So it doesn't happen just boom out of the blue, and that it becomes a little bit more like, I'm choosing to do this right now. So, this first step of acknowledging that this developed as a survival strategy is going to help you with the next 2. So, number 2, begin to acknowledge and validate your own feelings. If you grew up in an environment where you learned to fawn, my guess is not only were the caregivers not paying any attention to your feelings, you had to subjugate your own feelings. So you didn't become aware of what feelings you were having. So as an adult, it's needed that you begin to be like, "Oh, okay, I'm feeling angry or sad or frustrated or irritated." Begin to really acknowledge and even verbalize what you're feeling. And oh, by the way, there's some very interesting research, and I'm going to do a video on this coming up. So make sure you're subscribed if you're interested. But there's some very interesting research about how that simple act of labeling your emotion calms down your fight, flight, freeze response and increases activity in the areas of the brain that really can help you do things and solve problems. So acknowledge your feelings, label them. Number 3, practice self compassion. I know this is really hard, but understanding why this developed can help you with that self compassion. And then also know that changing these behaviors is hard and it takes time. So if you find yourself just automatically fawning and later you're yelling at yourself, try not to do that. You're basically kind of re-traumatizing yourself for a behavior you learned. Maybe it could be a little bit more like noting it with some self-compassion. Oh, interesting. I fell into that again. And then this is going to link to our next one. You'll know why in a moment. But you could be, I fell into that again because this was the situation. So observe with compassion. So that was 1 through 3. So number 4 starts our second set of slightly more practical tools. But number 4 is to identify those situations that get you into fawning behavior and identify your triggers. So you can probably see how 3 and 4 are connected. Because if with some type of self compassion and that observer brain, you can be like, oh, okay, yeah, well, that was the pattern. That's why I went into fawning. That's so much more productive than criticizing yourself. And then that can be utilized in this step number 4. So, in identifying these patterns that trigger you into fawning, you'll be identifying the situations that you were in as a child that were either dangerous emotionally or physically, or created a rift between you and your caregivers. And identifying those situations will help you understand what patterns got embedded way back here in the emotional brain. And as you do that, you can then be, oh, okay, those patterns are similar to this situation at work where there's a nasty boss or authority figure or an indifferent boss or authority figure. That is recreating this pattern for me. And when you do that, you're bringing in your frontal lobe to analyze it, right? So you have the emotional feeling, but you have the analysis and you have the observer looking at it all. And that will help you say, okay, that was threatening to my very existence when I was a child, but it is not threatening to my very existence right now. And this goes to that point about these automatic behaviors come from a need to survive in immediate danger. So it's not like the longer term threat of losing a job. I understand the uncertainty of what will happen. Yep, problematic, but it's not an immediate threat. And by being able to differentiate that it was a timely threat when you were young, but it is not now, will help you calm down that response. Number 5 is to keep a journal and a written journal. Great if you like to write. And if you don't, use the audio app on your phone and just make a little recording, say every day for 30 days. So, journal on the question: did I today say or do something to please someone else that was at my own expense? And if you review the events of the day, you could say, huh, I didn't do it there, but I did do it in these 5 places. And again, keeping that self compassion with you, no judgment. Observe, be aware this is going to take you some time. But I think it's just a great question that gets at the heart of the issue. What did I do today that ignored my own values or ignored my own needs in order to stay in relationship with someone else, in order not to be criticized or not to be rejected? And verbalizing it with your audio journal or writing it, again, you're utilizing a totally different part of your brain that is going to help you sort of comprehensively understand what's happening. Number 6, still on the practical tools, practice emotional regulation tools, diaphragmatic breathing, grounding exercises, whatever you can do to calm your physiology. And practice this on a daily basis, not in the middle of a trigger event, but regularly. You can even weave it through your day. You could set your alarm for 3 different times during the course of the day. And when your alarm goes off, simply take 3 deep diaphragmatic breaths. Nobody even has to be aware you're doing it. You can do it anywhere, it's free. And while it might not feel like it helps, what you are doing is, again, you're stimulating a different part of your sympathetic nervous system. You're stimulating a part of yourself that is going to help you realize, actually, in this situation, it would not be life threatening if the relationship is severed. I'm not in a situation where my immediate survival is at stake. And when you're not, when you are safe enough, although I know a lot of people hate that word, but when you are safe enough, your normal breathing pattern will be diaphragmatic. So it's all a feedback loop. And that is a bottom up, it's a body based technique that then communicates to the rest of your brain. And by the way, the fawn response is differentiated from the fight, flight, and freeze response. Sometimes they're put all together. I actually think it's more useful to separate them, but that's a little bit of a longer topic, and I will come out with something on that topic. If you're interested, comment, let me know. But the fawn response actually uses different parts of the nervous system and different parts of the brain because it is largely about staying in connection. It is largely a behavior that developed that feels automatic, but it developed in order to stay in connection with others. However, having said that, knowing whether your go to method is fight, flight, or freeze underneath the fawn response can be really helpful. So some people who fawn really have like a flight response. They want to run away. Others are freezers, rarely fighters. Fighters generally don't develop the fawn response. But I just did a whole bunch of videos that talk about how to calm that fight, flight, freeze response. So those might be useful for you. Okay, so the last three things required for healing, which are a little bit deeper, requires somewhat deeper introspection, perhaps. So, number seven is to recognize your negative core beliefs. What beliefs developed for you very young when you were in those situations that led you to fawn? And what beliefs developed out of that fawning? So, a very common one for people who fall into the pattern of fawning is my needs don't matter. And that even goes to I don't matter. There could be other ones like I'm not good enough, I'm powerless to change things, a feeling of being in danger for sure. But these can all be negative core beliefs. And identifying them and then beginning to use some tools. And I do have a bunch of videos, a PDF, a whole lot of material on this, but rewiring some of those negative core beliefs, super helpful. So, number eight is to recognize when you are having those kind of thoughts, recognize when you are operating out of that negative core belief, whether you're fawning or not. So, you might be operating out of that negative core belief almost all the time, even if you're not fawning, but recognize it, begin to separate from the thought. Not all of our thoughts are true, not all of our beliefs are true. So we diffuse from our thoughts, again, utilizing that observer brain that can be like, huh, I'm thinking about that again. I'm thinking that again. But I know it isn't necessarily true. And in line with some of the techniques to rewire those negative core beliefs will be techniques to challenge your automatic thoughts and reframe them. And I'm going to just throw in a little tool here, practice as if. So sometimes if you know you are feeling like my needs don't matter, pretend that they matter. What would you do right now? So, and you can practice that in small ways. Okay, so number nine is establishing healthy boundaries. But I put this at the end because establishing healthy boundaries is not about saying no. Sometimes saying no is a healthy boundary, sometimes it's not, but that's not all it is. Healthy boundaries are really about a deep understanding of yourself and your values, and an understanding of kind of where you end and others begin. So, to really understand healthy boundaries, it requires some deep work until you are able to develop a certain amount of emotional regulation. It's impossible to put healthy boundaries in place. Because if you have that amygdala firing with fight, flight, freeze, which makes you fawn, right? It's automatic. It's happening so fast. Your brain might know, oh, I should be saying no right now, or I should be leaving the conversation. But that panic response has set in, it's automatic, and all your brain is focused on is keeping that relationship staying safe by not causing conflict. So the emotional regulation piece is actually required before you can implement anything you've learned. So healthy boundaries really aren't about like learning more information. You've probably read a lot of information. You probably have a lot of cognitive awareness and knowledge of what a healthy boundary might be. And then you get frustrated that you can't implement it because no one talks about the fact that it starts with emotional regulation. It starts with beginning to heal some of those negative core beliefs. It starts with knowing, even if you don't feel it, knowing that you can be safe without maintaining this toxic relationship or that difficult relationship, or you can stay safe enough even if there's conflict. So it's almost like you have to physically feel some of that, and then the boundaries start to happen. So if you're working on your boundaries, I'm going to let you know how I structured it in my program. Whether you want to do the program or not, no worries, but start with the emotional regulation piece. Start with recognizing those trigger situations and the self compassion. And this is the structure of my program. Know what your negative core beliefs are and begin to utilize some methods to overturn those negative core beliefs. And then begin to put in place boundaries, knowing that boundaries are primarily for you. They're not necessarily about changing the other person, which most of us would rather change the other person. Totally understand it. When someone else's behavior is destructive, hostile, not good, we want them to change. But that's actually not what boundaries do. Boundaries are about what will I put up with, what will I not put up with, and what consequence will I put in place for myself if I put up with this when I know I shouldn't, right? And again, this isn't about punishing yourself, but it's more about helping yourself retrain your responses. And then it's learning assertive communication because there's passive communication, which a lot of people who fall into a fawn pattern will use passive communication. There's a lot of aggressive communication, which an abuser might use. And then there's assertive, it's in the middle. Assertive is, I'm okay, you're okay. So the boundary program I have also goes into assertive communication, and that's definitely something that is worth looking into and learning if you tend to fawn. Because many people who fawn, who really, really want to avoid conflict, feel that they'll actually interpret assertive communication as being aggressive, and they don't want to be aggressive because nobody wants to be like the aggressive abuser. Like, that would be the worst thing. So I'd rather be passive. But there is a middle ground. So I'd love to know from you whether it feels like you could practice some of these techniques. Because if you do, and if you practice these techniques a month, 2 months, I think you'll begin to see some changes, which will improve your self esteem. It will improve physiologically how you're feeling and gradually change your behavior. As usual, I'd love to hear what you think, love to hear what questions you have. Comment below, and I truly hope this is helpful. See you next week.